Well, thank you all very much for coming out tonight. I have to say that I was with a client, young man, an hour and a half ago, and he convinced me that the world was coming to an end. So I was like driving over here trying to get my attitude back in the right place. We were having a really interesting conversation about the state of the world and social media, and a very bright young man. And he kind of laid it all out for me, and I thought, well, I don't know what I'm going to say tonight, but we'll see. I do have a really provocative topic to discuss with you guys tonight. And what we're going to do is I'm going to speak for about an hour, and then we're going to turn the camera off, and we can have some conversation, and I can answer questions, and we can troubleshoot or do whatever we need to do that would be helpful for all of you. So, so here is the overriding question that you guys are probably all asking yourselves time and time again through the course of raising your children. And I certainly asked myself when I was raising my son. I have a son who's 27 now. And this is the question. How do we raise well-adjusted, productive, self-sufficient, independent, civil adults in a very complicated world that values performance over character? Provocative question, right? And it's something that we're going to tackle tonight by looking at the influence of the pressure in our culture to be perfect, what that means and where it's coming from. So more specifically, 4 specific things that we're going to address tonight. The pressure that our kids are under to be perfect, the consequences of that pursuit on our children, the benefits of failure, and what we can do as parents and teachers and administrators and counselors. And I know a lot of you probably play multiple roles in addition to being a parent. So you'll learn a lot about a lot of things tonight that are relevant for your children, but that are also relevant for each and every one of you in your professions and as adults, right? So that's what's kind of cool about most of my talks. Even though we're focusing on the kids, you guys will walk away with some things you want to probably make some changes in your own lives as well. So I've been sitting on my couch, and it's the same couch, believe it or not, for the last 20 plus years, working with families and couples and individuals and kids. And as a culture, what I've noticed is we've really come to value performance over character. We're judging ourselves and others based on what we see, hear, and read on our rectangles. I call them rectangles. Our telephones, our cell phones. Mine's sitting right over there, so I have a clock. I call it a rectangle because I try very hard not to respect it too much, not to give it too much power. And I feel like calling it a rectangle brings me down to earth in relation to the device itself. So, once again, we judge ourselves and others based on what we see and hear and read on our rectangles, much of which isn't even real. And never have we known more about how to be healthy in mind and body and spirit, and yet never have we been more stressed, more anxious, and more depressed. And that is pre-COVID. It is now, as we continue to struggle with this issue, this huge issue in our country around COVID, and it's going to continue post-COVID. So we went into COVID not doing very well. If you remember back pre-COVID, we were seeing an exponential increase in anxiety and depression in our children, and we'll look at some of those statistics tonight. And we were also seeing an exponential increase in suicide amongst our boys and our girls, upwards of 40% and 30% respectively. So we were struggling then, and I was doing this talk that I'm giving tonight pre-COVID because I was trying to get people to shift their perspective as parents and you know, as how you guys parent. So we're struggling and our kids are struggling, and we're raising kids who believe that getting an A in AP Bio and having pages of notable accomplishments by the time they're in elementary school will translate into a meaningful and satisfying life. They think it's normal to live in a virtual world where they compare themselves to false realities and believe that they must be perfect in order to be worthy of love. Anxiety is common and ever present, sabotaging the quality of their lives. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of misconceptions that our children are growing up with. And I know all of this for a fact because I see it in my practice every single day. I saw it evolve over the last 25 years. And it's been upsetting and it's been disturbing to watch what has happened with these younger generations and the confluence of technology and the pressure in our culture to perform. I've also watched all of you lose your North Star in relation to parenting. And of course you are, because we're dealing with situations that we've never in the history of mankind dealt with. Technology is something that's more powerful than our parenting is in relation to influencing our children. How do we parent in the face of something like that? We don't know because we've never had to do it before. Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about. So my goal tonight, you guys, is to educate and inspire all of you to change how you think about your role in your children's lives. And also, ultimately, to ponder the point of life itself. Okay, and you're all like, well, I didn't really come here for a philosophical conversation about life. And I know it sounds really deep and existential, what I'm saying, but it's meant to be that way. Because as far as I can tell, the only way through this chaos that we have in our lives right now is grounding ourselves in what really matters. We've got to get back to what really matters. And that is from an adult perspective in our lives, the choices we want to make, as well as the way that we parent our children. And then from that perspective, based on what really matters, we make decisions. We use that information as filters to make decisions and solve problems, and we raise our children from that perspective. So when I'm working with parents in my practice, we do that exercise. I challenge you guys to identify what is really important to you. What are those things that really are important and drive you, and you want to communicate these things to your children in the form of your everyday life and your goals and your modeling of problem solving and decision making. Okay? Because once you know what that filter is, you can find your courage to push against the tide, because you are going to have to push against the tide because we're all discombobulated right now. And it's going to take courage to do the kinds of things that I'm going to ask you to do tonight differently than you've been doing them. Okay, so I do remain eternally hopeful and optimistic, even when I'm tired and burned out myself. I am convinced that we can all handle the world that we live in a lot better than we're handling it. And I see it in my practice all the time. I see people come in and they're discombobulated, and we work on things together, and they make changes, and they focus on different things, and they end up feeling better about the world and about themselves. Okay, so I know that it can happen. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about the pressure that our kids are under to be perfect. So let's go ahead. I've got this in my, usually I have two hands available, so I apologize if this is distracting that I keep coming over to this table. Okay. Let's first talk about what perfectionism is. Let's define it first. So here's a simple definition. The root of perfectionism is believing that your self-worth is based on your achievements. Okay? So I will be honest with you and admit to the fact that I am a dyed-in-the-wool perfectionist myself. And it was really, for me, a combination of many different things in my upbringing, probably most of which had to do with my just inborn temperament. So one of the questions that I always get when I do this talk is someone will say, what do you do, Alicia, if you have a child that just comes by perfectionism naturally? Like they just drive themselves hard that way. We don't care. We're trying to back them off. We're trying to get them to lower their expectations, and they won't do it. All right, so that's something that we can talk about a little bit later if it's relevant for anybody here tonight. So what kinds of achievements do our children measure their self-worth against? Things like their grades, their looks, their athletic prowess, their public awards and recognition, whether or not they get into a good college, the number of friends they have, the number of likes they get, like all kinds of different things that feed into how they feel about themselves. All right, so perfectionism is actually a belief system. So I'll have a client in and I'll be working with them and I'll realize that they have perfectionistic tendencies, and I'll suggest to them that, well, maybe you have perfectionistic tendencies. And they'll say, oh, I'm not a perfectionist. Have you seen my room? I mean, my room's a mess. Because perfectionists, they have everything perfect. They organize and they clean and they have everything in place and blah, blah, blah. But in reality, you could be a perfectionist and have a messy room, because perfectionism is, in fact, a belief system. And it's a belief system about how the world works. So, this is the belief system. If I'm not perfect, I'll not be lovable. I won't be respected. I won't be successful. I won't be good enough. Right? It's not rational. So perfectionism is not rational. And as we know, it's not achievable, because there's no such thing. Well, let me explain to you what perfectionists do. And then we're going to talk about 3 different types of perfectionism. So here's what perfectionists do. They set the bar really, really high. And usually it's set at a place that most people would think they wouldn't be able to make it. And a lot of perfectionists are overachievers by nature, of course, because they're perfectionists. And so let's say they achieve their goal. Let's say, and I've had this in my practice with some teenagers that were extreme perfectionists. They'll come in and they'll say, oh my, and they'll be in tears. And they'll say, oh man, I blew it. I blew it on my chemistry test. It's going to screw up my GPA. I'm not going to graduate top of my class. And, you know, they're going on. And I'm thinking, oh, that's too bad, you know. I wonder. And so I start probing, and I ask them, well, I mean, how did it go? I mean, what did you end up getting on the exam? And a lot of perfectionists they don't even want to tell you, because they don't want to talk about their imperfections. Well, I don't want to talk about it. I said, well, just give me a number. What'd you get on the exam? I got a 95. You got a 95? And you're crying? Okay, so that is a perfectionist, right? So this person is actually suffering because they didn't get an A++. They didn't get the extra 10 points on the exam and get 110 instead of a 95. So what do they do when they actually meet their goal? When perfectionists meet their goal, they reason that the goal must not have been high enough. So I should raise it again. And they continue to do this until they turn into a pile of dust, all right? Which eventually will happen because they go through cycles like this. So that is true perfectionism, when you keep raising the bar and raising the bar, regardless of whether or not you meet it. So you never get to experience the actual joy of achievement and accomplishment. So that is just basic perfectionism in a nutshell. So now let's flesh it out a little bit, because it is a little more complicated than that. There are actually 3 different types of perfectionism. One is a self-oriented perfectionism. So it's an expectation of yourself that you need to be perfect. There is the second, which is an other-oriented definition of perfectionism, and that is that I expect other people to be perfect. And you can have all three of these, by the way. They're not mutually exclusive. And then the final one, which is an interesting one, and you'll see why in a second, is that you think that other people expect you to be perfect. Okay? Interesting distinction there. So hold on to that for a second. So perfectionism in its extreme form, regardless of the type of perfectionism, can be toxic, can make you sick, actually. And those individuals desire success, yet they're more focused on avoiding failure. So regardless of which type of perfectionism, if you're employing it in your belief system, you're motivated by fear. You're not motivated by a desire to achieve. Those are two really different things, because when you're motivated by fear, it's far more difficult to be healthy in the face of that. And it's also difficult to sustain your achievement, to sustain your engagement and your motivation. Okay, so they're not really reaching for excellence, perfectionists aren't. Instead, they're motivated to perform in order to avoid failure. So they've always been around, these people. Anybody in here willing to raise your hand if you think you might fit into one of those three categories of perfectionism? Yeah, good, thanks. Want to go out for a drink after? Okay, so we've been around, all of us perfectionists, for quite some time. But according to some research in the Psychological Bulletin that came out in 2016, it looked at generational differences in perfectionism over the past 3 decades. Between 1989 and 2016, they found that young people's desire to be flawless has skyrocketed. Skyrocketed. No regard for gender, no regard for culture, no regard for socioeconomic status. Skyrocketed in the last 30 years. So, which form of perfectionism do you think has gone up the most? Number 3, exactly. So, number 3 is that socially prescribed perfectionism, where we think that other people expect us to be perfect, has gone up 33% in its presence in our young generations in the last 30 years. The other two have also gone up, both of them about 10%. But the one that we really want to look at is the fact that our children are getting the message that we expect them to be perfect, and that we don't find them good enough or worthy unless they are. Now you can imagine what that must feel like, right? Just take a second to imagine what that feels like. My generation, baby boomer generation, our parents were basically negligent. And they were emotionally negligent, that's unfortunate. They could have done a better job there. But in general, their negligence allowed our generation to go out and skin our knee and figure things out. And there were, they didn't know the names of our teachers. They weren't on Power School every 5 minutes checking to see if we turned in our chem homework. They weren't micromanaging us. They weren't putting our resume together in 8th grade and hiring an educational consultant to get us ready to go to college. These things were not happening. We just had to show up for dinner. And even if we dragged in, it's like, oh, you're bleeding. Oh, yeah, I know. Oh, it's all right. I'll be all right tomorrow. So we learned a level of grit and resilience, not necessarily a generation of parenting that we want to duplicate, okay, because there was some really not so good things about that generation too. They started drinking cocktails around 4, and we could go on and on about that. But the point being that our children haven't had the benefit of more of a free range sort of approach, And they've been growing up in a very adult-run, adult-oriented environment everywhere they go. And we'll talk about that a little more in a second. So young people are getting the message very early on that they must compete with each other. So there's this false perception that there are limited everything out there. There's limited space in college. Are you kidding me? There's like I don't know what the number is, but there's thousands of colleges in the United States. There's not limited space in college. Now, if you're trying to get into Harvard, yeah, there's limited space in Harvard. But that's less than 1% of the population, right? Do we need to parent our children based on that expectation? No. We don't have limited resources. There are jobs. There's a house and an apartment and a place for everybody to live for the most part, okay? But we have this perception, and we're passing it on to our kids, that you have to be the best. And that means that we're pitting them against their peers. And we're measuring them. We're measuring them and comparing them and telling them where they fall. Well, you're in the 90th percentile. Well, you're in the 60th percentile. 60th percentile, I mean, that's average, right? And I hate to break it to you, but just about all of us fall within the average range. If you look at a regular bell curve, it kind of goes like this. All right? And these people out on this end, these are the people that, like this kid that I was talking about, that I was working with today, he's out here on the end. I'm catching up intellectually when we're having conversations. Okay? He's way ahead of me. Most of us are somewhere here in the middle. So what happened to average? And when I say that word, I bet you guys go like, average? Ooh, jeez. I want my kid to be average. That sounds terrible. Sounds like they might be homeless if they're average. Why can't you be average and extraordinary? You can. So here's what the concept of average means. It means that you're not good at everything. Our kids are getting the message that they have to be good at everything. They're being told, okay, so look, I don't care that you can't learn languages. You got to go learn French. It's a requirement. You get an A because you need that grade point average to get into a good college. So, figure it out. Go do it. You got to sit down, study, get that done. Rather than do what we all do in our lives, which is distinguish between what is really important to us or what we really enjoy or what we're really good at, and the opposite of that. Why can't you get a nice solid B in French? Or heaven forbid, even a C. But get an A in English because you love it. And an A in history because you're really hot on history. Or maybe you love computer programming. So you put a little more energy into that. Isn't that what we all do? So you can be average over here and extraordinary over here. Right? It's a different way of thinking about things, a different way of parenting. Giving your kids permission to regulate their focus and their effort and their energy. Obviously, you're going to build expectations and structure and all those really good things that we'll talk about in more specifics in another talk and how to do that. Because that's really important. You don't want to do permissive parenting where you're like, hey, whatever you want to do is fine. No, that's ridiculous. Your kids aren't going to, they're not going to grow up with self-esteem in an environment like that. They need expectations and structure. But the structure and the expectations need to be thoughtfully established based on what's important to you and what's important to them, and where they are in their development and what their temperament is. Right? So let's take a look at a few things. Okay, so let me just say this again. Young people get the message very early on that they must compete with each other in order to meet societal pressures to succeed. And they feel that perfectionism is necessary in order to feel safe, socially connected, and of worth. Okay, so what is creating this? And we don't, let me just preface what I'm going to explain to you what I think is creating it. We don't know for sure. It's very complicated. There are many elements that are coming together or can come together in any given family and any given individual child. Okay, but there are some ubiquitous sort of things that are going down that we need to change. One is, let's just deal with biology first. There is definitely a biological component for some people when it's related to perfectionism. So OCD, right, obsessive compulsive disorder, a lot of people who have OCD tend to have very strong underlying perfectionistic characteristics. Okay, so there is a biological component because we know that OCD can be genetic, it can be passed on. So we need to just look at that and recognize that some are going to come into this world that way. And our job as parents is to actually help them regulate down, okay, in a significant way. Another component that's influencing this is unrealistic expectations of our children that are being placed on them that are developmentally inappropriate. And I see this more so with the boys than the girls, although the girls obviously experience this as well. The difference is that boys come into the world a little bit behind socially and cognitively. So now we have, preschool. Guys heard about this? Like preschool isn't enough. How old are these children in preschool? And so we get these kids and we start them, and there are expectations in preschool. And then there's expectations in preschool. And the expectations on the boys are developmentally inappropriate. They're expected to have fine motor skills and be able to sit quietly and concentrate and stand in line without smacking the other kid or pushing somebody or whatever. And obviously I'm generalizing for clarity. I understand that there's, we're talking about the genetic or the sexual definition of boys and girls. And I know that the world has gotten complicated and we have lots of different identifications going on. But for the sake of clarity, we don't have research about all of that yet. So I'm talking specifically about just girls, the category of girls and the category of boys. Okay? So here's what happens with boys. And I do a talk on raising boys because it breaks my heart. By the time boys in general get into the 4th grade, they start to feel completely inadequate, like they can't handle what's coming their way, and they start to check out. And they do that in a lot of different ways, and then often what we see is that by the time they're in high school, they're looking towards substances, and they're looking towards gaming, and they're isolating. And again, I'm obviously, there are a lot of individual differences there. But a trend, right? A pattern that we see. So what we do when we expect our children and require our children to do something that they are neurologically and physically not ready to do, right? They can be on the cusp of readiness and we can push them over the edge. But when we hit it way too early, we develop this sense of inadequacy, and it translates into a low sense of self-worth and self-esteem. And that combined with this perception that you expect me to be perfect sets them up for depression and anxiety and substance use and abuse and suicide. Okay? So one of the things that we're doing is we're setting unrealistic expectations that are developmentally inappropriate. The other thing that we're doing is we're using praise instead of positive reinforcement. So we're praising our kids. Oh, Johnny, you're such a good boy. You're such a good boy for setting the table. Thank you so much. Sounds okay, right? Okay to do sometimes. Praise is okay sometimes. But when it's a pattern of delivering a message back to your kid that you like what they're doing, listen to what it says. Oh, you're a good boy for setting the table. Thank you. It's a judgment, right? And your children actually process it that way, and it doesn't always feel good to them, because what it means is that when they don't do something, then they're a bad boy, right? How else do we praise? We reward and we recognize our kids. What we try to do is we try to actually teach them self-esteem, right? So you got these award ceremonies, and you know, the schools do it, right? And they pack, and everybody comes in, and they're so proud of their kids. It's wonderful. But then you get some of these awards are ridiculous. It's like, well, you know, Mary never missed a day of school in 12 years. And here's Mary, and she's like trying to get up there, you know? It's like she had COVID and she went to school. She had the flu and she went to school. She got the measles and we sent her to school. Hey, Mary, let's give her an award, you know? So when we do, and by the way, I mentioned this, and now I'm more comfortable with it that my son is 27 and he'll never see this recording, but he never got an award. We never went to an award ceremony. And we loved it. We're like, yay, Clay. You didn't get an award. That's wonderful. We praised him for that. You're such a good boy. No award. You're average. We're so happy, you know. And I will say, just bragging-wise, he's extraordinary. He's lovely. He's a lovely human being. And we parented the way that I suggest you guys parent. So we didn't parent based on performance. We parented based on character. It's like, look, you know, you can fail an exam, but you're not going to be disrespectful to your teacher. Okay? That's not happening. That's a hard stop. You're going to be polite. You're going to be kind. All of those, you know, you're going to have integrity. You're going to tell the truth. We raised him with character. So what's happening now for him in life out there in the big bad world is that he's competing against kids that don't have grit and resilience and don't have the character and might have gone to Stanford and Harvard and UPenn and all these other schools. And you know who they want these days? You know who people want to hire? Is kids that are going to work hard and know how to conduct themselves in life. That's what they want. They don't necessarily want the kid who got straight A's. Okay? All right, so excessive praise and recognition for achievements. So what this does is, what I want you guys to focus on is I want you to emphasize effort over performance. When you emphasize performance, you reinforce what we call an external locus of control in your children. And what that means is they work for the recognition. They don't work for the satisfaction. When you emphasize effort, they work for the satisfaction. You understand the difference there? Really, really important. So the praise and the recognition, when overdone, emphasizes an external locus of control. And what that means, is, and I see it in these generations of kids coming up, is that they feel like victims all the time and they don't know how to take responsibility because they don't understand that they actually can influence the quality of their own lives. When you have an internal locus of control, you have a fundamental belief system that tells you that you can handle it, whatever it is. So if you fail an exam, you don't blame the teacher. It's like, whoa, you know, those teachers, they 3 exams on one day, and they told us 2 days before, and I can't believe it, and, you know, that's why I didn't do well. That's an external locus of control. You're giving your power away. You're saying, you know what? It didn't have to do with me. It has to do with everybody else. If they just changed and figured things out differently, I'd be doing much better. But think about going through life like that. That's a painful place to be because you don't have any control. You're not taking control. But when you have an internal locus of control and you fail an exam, the first thing you're going to say to yourself is, self, wait a minute. What did I do wrong there? What could I have done differently? Maybe I should go talk to the teacher and find out. Because I studied and I thought I knew the material and I went to the review and I feel like I did everything I was supposed to do, but clearly I missed something. So it's my fault, right? That I'm in the situation that I'm in. That's an internal locus of control. That's what you want your kids to have. You want your children to have an internal locus of control. Because then they're going to be able to weather all the challenges and the ups and downs. And it isn't always going to be pretty. It's going to be ugly sometimes. I mean, look at us. Sometimes we really mess it up, right? It's all right. It's this beautiful thing, because we're all human. So, a few other things. Being measured and compared, I mentioned. It's another reason why our children are getting the message that they need to be perfect. It's creating a competitive developmental environment where they learn a belief system that if you're not the best, you're not good enough. Okay? So we're raising our children in an adult world where they're constantly monitored and measured and compared and told what to do and how to do it. And it's so funny because I'll lay that out for the teens that come into my practice, and I'll say, is this how you feel? And they start to smile, and they're like, oh, yeah, that's how I feel. I feel like I'm just, basically, I've had 5 teenagers in the last 2 years tell me, I feel like I'm an object to my parents. I feel like they care more about my performance than they care about how I feel. And they use those words. They feel like objects, like we're perfecting them. You're not a person, you're not a human being, you're not allowed to fail. You have to live up to my expectations in order to be good enough. Okay? Okay, let me just check my time here. All right. Okay, a few more things, and then I'm going to give you some pearls of wisdom here. All right, the other thing is that we're raising our children in a world that is foundationally, perceptually become black and white. So much of that has to do with social media. Look at the discourse. Everything is right and wrong, bad and good, pretty and ugly, smart and dumb. The gray, where's the gray? We need to get back to the gray. As parents, I want you to get back to the gray with your children. Be careful of the language that you use when you're expressing your own experiences and modeling behavior, and when you're having conversations with your children about their own experiences. And when you hear them using black and white language, which by the way is completely developmentally appropriate, because as middle schoolers and teenagers, they're very literal. Their prefrontal cortexes are not fully developed yet. They don't have the reasoning ability. And they're going to be very didactic, very black and white. So that's okay. You don't have to push against that too much. Just when you hear them processing in black and white, like, it's the end of my world, because I didn't get invited to that birthday party, and now I'm a loser in everybody's eyes. That's very black and white. And you want to work with your children and talk to them collaboratively in a different way. And we'll, I'll be back to talk in more detail about that. Okay. Okay. The other thing that we're doing is we're either out of fear, we're creating too rigid of a parental environment, and we're using a very authoritarian way of parenting, which is very black and white, very right and wrong. It's my way or the highway. We're not talking about most things are not up for discussion. You do it my way or else. Versus also a very permissive environment where permissive indifferent, where we're just kind of hands off, like, hey, we let our kids throw them in the pool, let them learn to swim by themselves while, we're walking away having a conversation with somebody. So permissive indifferent parenting or permissive indulgent parenting. And this is what I see quite a bit of the permissive indulgent parenting, and I think it's coming from a place of fear. So let me give you an example of what that kind of parenting looks like. It's like, let's say you have a teenage boy who loves to play video games, and you're letting him play permissive. You're just letting him play every weekend. He plays like 8-9 hours a day, and you peek in every now and again, and you say, "Hey, are you hungry? Can I make you a sandwich? Or is there anything you need? Can I bring you anything?" That's permissive indulgent. So a lot of times, if a parent is permissive indulgent, they're seeing their relationship, they're insecure in their relationship with their children. And they're actually working towards approval from their children. All right? So they want their children to like them. And so they're permissive indulgent. They let them do what they want to do, even if it's not good for them. And they actually help them. You know? They take more responsibility off their plate while they're engaging in whatever these activities are. Okay. All right. And then finally, we can never have a conversation anymore without talking about social media and its pervasive influence on our culture right now, on our mental health and well-being. I cannot impress upon you guys. I'm almost speechless around this topic because it has become so destructive, not just to our children's mental health and their socio-emotional development, but to all of our lives. And we have to start making difficult choices around it in the family structure that our children are not going to be happy about and that we're necessarily not going to be comfortable with. And those choices have to do with when you get your child a cell phone, whether or not they have access to the internet, how much screen time they spend. 33% of the infants in this country have a screen in their bedrooms. Infants. Parents are turning the screen on with some kind of, stimulus to help them sleep, to get them back to sleep at night. You go out to dinner, you see these little people who haven't even started to talk yet, and they're holding a cell phone, and they're swiping. And you see that their eyes are dull. They're like, I mean, a monkey can learn how to use these devices. I've had parents say, well, Alicia, if you delay too long, this is a technology world, these kids are going to get behind. They're not going to know how to use technology. I'm like, I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, it's not rocket science. I think they got enough of that at school. They're going to pick up on it. It's going to be fine, right? It just takes courage. So what's happening in social media that's influencing our kids' perceptions of life, as you know. I know I'm speaking to the choir. You go on social media and you got, these family pictures. Everybody's on vacation and they're so happy. And they're not so happy. But they sure look like it. Everyone looks great. Everybody looks successful. Everybody looks happy. 99.9% of us aren't completely that way because we're human. But we lose sight of that. Even as adults, we lose sight of that. You imagine if you were a teenager or a middle schooler and you were trying to distinguish between what was real and what isn't real? I would have been a disaster. Honestly, I would have been a complete disaster. The level of insecurity I remember having at that age, and then looking at pictures of people and families and activities that are all based on looking perfect, and my inability, because of my immaturity, to distinguish between what's real and what isn't real, and what I should be placing my expectations or deriving my expectations from. It's a mess. It's a mess. And it's bigger than us, and it's bigger than all of you, and I know that. I recognize that. There's no simple answer. But we've got to start the process of pushing against it a little bit. Okay. All right, I want to read something to you, and then we're going to spend the last few minutes going over. I have a handout for you, going over the content on the handout, which is actually some ways of countering this culture of perfectionism that you guys can utilize. So, if you've heard me speak, this is one of my favorite stories. Actually, it's an autobiography. It's written by Portia Nelson. It's called "There's a Hole in My Sidewalk." It's only 5 chapters and they're like 10 seconds each. Okay. Listen to it and then we'll just briefly talk about what it means. Chapter 1. I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm helpless. It's not my fault though. And it takes me forever to find my way out. Chapter 2. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend like I don't see it, and I fall in. I can't believe I'm in the same place again. But it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time for me to get out. Chapter 3. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. And I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5. I walk down a different street. This is the process of life. We have to let our children fall into their holes and struggle and flounder. Obviously not if the hole has spikes in it, okay? So if it's something that's going to be harmful to your children's well-being, their physical well-being, their emotional well-being in a severe sort of way, you are obviously not going to let them fall into that hole. But most of what's going on in their lives are not going to hurt them or kill them. They need to fall in these holes and realize. So the process of realizing where they are and realizing and getting out with support, it's okay. It's not like you're not just going to walk away and leave them in there. Maybe for a little while though. By the time they actually figure out that they can walk down a different street, what have they gained from that process? They've gained that external locus of control. They've gained this idea that they can handle it. It's like, oh my gosh, geez, I handled that. Look at me. And your feedback is going to be what? You're not going to praise them. You're going to actually reinforce the effort. It's like, wow, that must have been a really difficult situation to deal with. How did you do it? Huh, wow. That's clever. Or good for you. That's really self-respecting of you to treat yourself like that in that situation. Or that was really compassionate of you to treat the other person that way in that situation. Right? So you give them thoughtful feedback, meaningful feedback about their effort. And then when they fall in the hole again, same one or a different one, they can remember back. They could say, or you can remind them, remember when you fell in that hole a couple weeks ago? Well, this is a different hole, but it's really similar. You can do it. You can get out again. How can I support you? I'm here. Just let me know if you need me to help you out. Okay? We've got to let our kids go through this process of failing and realizing that they can handle it. Okay. So in support of that, and this is the handout you guys are going to get, there are 14 core messages that I feel like we need to deliver to our children to counterbalance this culture of perfectionism and deliver it to them in a multitude of ways, not in a PowerPoint presentation. All right? So you're not going to sit your kid down and say, okay, I have 14 core messages I'd like to share with you. And, that's not going to work. So sometimes we have to get clever. So you're going to find ways of coaching your children around these these ideas. You're going to find ways of modeling this behavior for them. A really cool way to communicate something to our children that we don't want to communicate directly because they're gonna shut down is to make it your problem and ask them for help. Right? It's really, and watch your kids, their eyes will be like, you say, I got this situation at work. And obviously, you want to present something that's developmentally appropriate for their age. And, you say, I had this difficult situation in a meeting and, I don't know, I'm a little confused about have you ever had anything like that happen with you and your friends? Oh my God, what a great way to get your kids to open up. They'll be like, huh. And then you say, I could really use some help with this. Do you have any ideas on how I might be able to handle it? And if they shut you down, that's fine. If they, if you have a boy and he's like, huh? Because my son would go, what? I don't even know what you're asking me. And then I'd get frustrated. I'd be like, what are you talking about? And my husband would be behind my son, and he'd be going like this. He'd say, he stopped listening to you 2 minutes ago. Oh, God, all right. I had a lot to learn. So, yeah, if they shut you down, that's fine. Just keep trying. But it's a great way to break through with your kids, all right? And then what you can do is, I was thinking that maybe I'd try this. What do you think about that? And what you're doing is you're actually teaching them. They're thinking like, oh, how would that turn out? Is there any downside to that? I don't know, And they're learning. They're learning. Okay. So let's go through these real quick, and then we're going to have some conversation. All right, the first message, suffering is a normal part of life. Our kids think that when they're suffering, something is wrong. Like something's really wrong. And the truth is, yeah, when you're suffering, there's something wrong, and you probably need to take a look at that suffering and figure it out for yourself and maybe make some changes or solve a problem. But the point is that it's going to keep coming up, this suffering thing, because this is a normal part of life. And we don't say this to our kids. They're suffering, we're like, well, honey, suffering's a normal part of life. No, we're not going to say that to them. What we're going to say to them is, it's uncomfortable sometimes, isn't it, sweetheart? I get it. It's really uncomfortable. So why don't you take the night, sleep on it. Let's try talking about it again tomorrow. Or remember that life is dynamic and this is going to evolve. Yes, I know your friend posted this on Instagram and it was a private conversation you had about this kid that you really, are interested in, and you've got to go now into school knowing that everybody's seen it. Terrible situation. Normal situation in this day and age, right? Suffering, yes. First thing you always want to do with your children, even if you don't agree with their interpretation of an event or their emotional reaction to an event, is to validate their feelings. And all you have to do is just say, you look miserable, or that's really hard. I get it. I understand, honey. And then you can work your way into conversation, whatever you need to do. So suffering is a normal part of life. If you try to avoid it, and we're doing a lot of that. Our kids are doing a lot of avoiding, trying to avoid suffering. Deny it, or you get stuck in it, and you're not going to grow, right? If you embrace it as being normal, you can balance it out with moments of joy. And that's a skill we want our kids to learn how to do because they have a lifetime of suffering ahead of them. I hate to tell you that, but it's true. And we have to get comfortable with that. At least we have to move into a place of comfort sometimes and allow it to be what it is. Connection with others is the most powerful antidote to human suffering. Connection is not Facebook. Connection is not Instagram. Connection is not Twitter. Connection is not texting. Connection is not email. This right here, what we're doing tonight, and I love this, because I get to see you guys. I'm looking right in your eyes. I wish I could see your whole face, but I'm looking right in your eyes. This, what we're doing tonight, this is connection. We have got to get back to teaching our children because we have a lot of healing to do. We just went through a horrendous almost 2 years and it's still not over. We have, all of us, a lot of healing to do, and the healing is going to come with this. This is why I don't have a PowerPoint presentation for you tonight. I don't have technology. I'm not up here with some, and some cartoon I'm reading to you. No, we're not going to do that. That gets in between us. I'm just like you guys. I struggle just like you guys. I don't have all the answers. I may not have any. I hate to tell you that. You've been sitting here for an hour, but the truth is that this is healing. Okay? We need to teach our children that. Most people are faking confidence. How many people fake confidence? I want to see every single hand go up. Come on, guys. Because we all have to, because we were not born knowing how to do everything. And we can't wait to know how to do something to be confident. So here's the thing about confidence. It's available to all of us right now. You don't have to do anything more in your life, nor do your children, to be confident. Because all confidence is a belief that you can figure it out. How many times when you're younger do you step into situations, hopefully you find your courage and you step into situations that you don't know a lot about, and someone says, hey, could you write that report? You're like, sure. Yes, of course I can. And then you go home and you say to your significant other, I have no idea what I'm doing. It's okay. You'll figure it out. That's confidence. Our kids think that confidence is based on knowledge and expertise and performance, that you build it over time. No. You find it. You find it in yourself, and then you apply it out. That's where we get our courage. So our kids need to learn about that. Okay, I know I'm running out of time. I'll blow through these. You always have a choice, no matter what. And our kids need to learn that choices have consequences, and the way they do that is not necessarily by you telling them that. It's by them falling in the hole and figuring it out. Something my dad told me, and that is to run your own race. We're so busy running everyone else's race these days. People we don't even know. Our 550,000 friends on Facebook were running their race. Start thinking for yourselves. Start parenting based on what's important to you, not what you're being told is important. Right? Run your own race. Teach your children to do the same. It's empowering. Along those lines, define a successful life for yourself. You talk to these kids and they think that everything is linear. Well, I go to school, I get straight A's, I graduate. Then I go to a really good college and I get straight A's again. And if I haven't died of overwork, then I graduate. And then, guess what? I get a really good job. And then I buy a house and I have kids and, live happily ever after. You know what these kids are telling me? I have middle schoolers that are coming in and saying to me, Dr. Farrell, what's the point? And I'll say, what do you mean, what's the point? It's like, what's the point of all this? Okay, so I perform. I do really well. I'm looking ahead, and I've got another 4 years of high school. I'm going to do this for another 4 years, and then what? Then I'm going to go to college, and I'm going to do it another 4 years? And then what? And then I'm going to get a job like my parents, and they're miserable. And these middle schoolers are saying to me, I don't understand. They're not having any fun. No one's having any fun. They don't understand what the point is. And for good reason. Because they're chasing something that doesn't exist. Right? Fixed ability doesn't exist. You can always get better. Bring your expectations down and your performance will go up. Use fear as a tailwind. I love this. I heard this on a podcast. I stole it. This guy was saying, he was being questioned about this long, illustrious career of his, where, and it was one of those typical stories where he started out actually pushing the broom around, and he ended up being this incredible music producer, famous, I forget his name. You guys would know who he is. Anyway, he was saying, I always use my fear as a tailwind instead of a headwind. So think about that. We operate on fear. We're humans. We're animals. Use your fear as a tailwind to propel you forward instead of a headwind to hold you back. Teach your kids how to do that. Okay. Last few. Staying flexible in the face of adversity instead of getting rigid and getting black and white. Teaching our children that wherever your time and energy goes, that's what gets bigger. So if you're going to spend a lot of time swiping and getting on social media and reading all that ridiculous stuff that is meaningless, and are you really going to be thinking about that on your deathbed? No, because there's no substance to it, right? So you put your energy there, and that's what's going to grow. You put your energy into an external locus of control and letting go of your power, that's where your energy is going to go. You're going to be a victim. You're going to walk around as a victim, which is exhausting. Okay. Last two is to learn to forgive. Got to teach our children to forgive. We're in a really unforgiving time in this world. And we're seeing our children, we're modeling for our children unforgiveness. Got to teach our kids to forgive themselves because they're imperfect, and to forgive us because we're imperfect, and to forgive their friends and their teachers because they too have expectations that everyone else needs to be perfect. Their teachers will come home. I hear, well, my teacher this, my teacher that. What are they, what else were they doing anything good? Yeah, well, they're an okay teacher, but honestly, can you believe that they did this? It's like, they should know better than that. These are children talking like this. It's like, what? You don't look up to somebody? No? You're going to judge them, criticize them? So forgiveness, really important for us to learn how to do. And then finally is humor. Humor, you guys, we got to get back to laughing. So if there isn't enough laughter in your house, a really great way to counterbalance this culture that we're raising our kids in is to get some laughter going. Meaningless laughter, not productive laughter that's going to lead to something, but just yucking it up, okay? Just yucking it up. And I have to say, I have to thank my husband, because he is that guy. And when we were raising Clay, he would make us laugh, and he would set us up. And it was just so much fun in our household because of that. Humor actually supports resilience. It supports grit. It's a release. Because when you laugh, you actually create hormones, oxytocin and dopamine and serotonin, that actually support the release of stress and anxiety and depression. So get back to laughing. Play some tricks on your kids. They're torturing you. Why not torture them a little bit? One time we filled these balloons full of water, and Clay came home from school, and you can only imagine what my husband and I did. And we tricked him into the backyard and then just, attacked him basically. with these water balloons. And yeah, then the revenge started. And the next night I was cooking and I went to turn the faucet on in the kitchen, and my son had taken a rubber band and he had pressed, with the rubber band, had put the squirter on. So when I was soaking wet and I was like, oh, okay, all right, game on, That went on for a couple of weeks. So have some fun, lighten it up. Don't take all of this so seriously, and your kids will be healthier for it. Okay, so we're going to stop here, and we're going to turn the camera off so that you